will also record. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on your time zone. Dear colleagues, welcome to this online session. My name is Teresa Puldová, and I'm greeting you all from Czech Center's headquarters in Prague. Today's online lecture is called Czechia, the importance of the short country name for the modern Czech statehood, and will be presented by Professor Petr Pavlínek from the University of Nebraska Omaha and Charles University. I would like to welcome Mr. Jan Marian, the Deputy of the Cabinet Minister from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we are very happy that he agreed to join us, and he will open the lecture with a short introduction. Before the lecture starts, I would like to remind a few technical details. Please keep your microphones off, and there will be a discussion after the talk. So please remember your questions, and or you can write it into chat box. And there will be a record from this lecture, and you will find it on the Czech Center's website. The link you can find in the chat as well. So now I would like to ask Mr. Marian to open our topic, please.
Good afternoon, morning, or evening, depending on the time zone. I'm really happy that Czech Centers organized this. The previous one on the same topic was held in Czech. It was a very good debate. I believe this one will be good as well. I think if we want to spread good name of this country, of our country, of my country, we need to be sure about the correct forms of the name. This is something written in a book recently published by Director General of the Czech Centers, but also Eliška Tomalová, whom I see here as well. I'd like to say that the foreign ministry and Czech diplomacy is fully devoted to using the short name. I think we have lost 30 years. Now we are trying to catch up, and we need short name for branding. We need short name also in order to avoid makeshift short names. That's a big problem, I think. And we are also working on the branding of Czechia, so the short name will be definitely part of this. And many of you will know and understand that this has been creating controversies for 30 years. So I hope Professor Pavlínek, who spent a lot of time on this, is more happy these days as other people who struggled for this. So, and by the way, of course, we are basically discussing English because in many languages, this goes without saying, and this works perfectly well. So now I think the short name Czechia is catching up, which is great. Details, of course, and more you will hear from Professor Pavlínek. I'd like to welcome you once again, and many thanks to the Czech Centers. And of course, as to the usage of this short version, you can find more details on the webpage of the Foreign Ministry or also at goczechia.com. So many thanks, welcome, and I hope you will enjoy the presentation and also the subsequent debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marian. And now, please, Professor Pavlínek, the topic is yours.
Okay. Good day, everyone. I hope you can hear me and you can still see the presentation. Am I correct? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So the topic of my presentation is about the short name Czechia and its importance for the modern Czech state. And I will start with the explanation of the difference between formal and short country names, also known as political and geographical names. Then I will briefly explain how country names are being standardized. And then I will focus on the short name Czechia. I will talk about its historical roots. I will talk about why Czechia has not been used since 1993, when the Czech Republic became an independent country after the breakup of former Czechoslovakia. Then I will explain the advantages of using the short name Czechia in English and explain the detrimental effects of the sole usage of the Czech Republic, which has been the case for almost a quarter of the century. Then I will explain the international standardization in 2016 and what happened after the international standardization of the short name Czechia in English, and how basically the progress or its spread was relatively slow. Then what I will talk about what happened after 2020 and especially 2022, when the progress has been more rapid. And then I will talk about the most common myths and facts about the short name Czechia, which have been used by, these myths have been used by its opponents to basically rationalize why we should not or they should not use the short name. Then we'll have time for the discussion and answers to questions. So let me start with the brief explanation why a country name and its proper use is important. Of course, a country name is part of national identity of every country, and we can understand it as one of its basic attributes in terms of the statehood, along with the flag, national emblem, national anthem, and in most countries also their currencies. A country name is also crucial for that particular country is identified and recognized abroad. And let me note right away that the way we use country name, and especially if we use or act in some kind of professional or state capacity, is not a matter of personal opinion. Now, we recognize two types of country names, or two types of country names are being used. The first one is a formal country name, which is also known as political. Throughout this lecture, I will use the term formal. It reflects the current political system of a country. So I have several examples here how these formal or political country names can look like. So we have the Federal Republic of Germany, we have the French Republic, we have the Kingdom of Denmark, the Principality of Liechtenstein, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, the Sultanate of Oman, Swiss Confederation, the Russian Federation, and of course, the Czech Republic. So these are examples of formal country names. Now, these are typically used in international treaties and in diplomatic protocol. Then we have short country names, also known as geographical country names, because they historically basically relate to a given territory, regardless of its changing political system. So immediately there is the advantage of timelessness of these short or geographical country names. So here is the list of the same countries I used to show their formal names: Germany, France, Denmark, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Oman, Switzerland, Russia, and of course, Czechia. Now compare that with the formal country names of these countries. So you can see that the list is much shorter, concise, clear, and it also explains why the use of short country names is more practical. Now, sometimes I hear that short country names have to be one word and names, and that other countries also use two-word names. Well, short country names are typically one-word names, but they don't have to be. Again, it's important that they are geographical, that they relate to a particular geographical territory. So there are, of course, countries whose country names are composed of 2 words or even 3. We have examples here: New Zealand, Northern Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Equatorial Guinea, and others. Now, when are these short country names being used? In everyday speech, in the media, in sports, in marketing, on maps. Basically, in all cases when we do not have to use formal names. It is also important to emphasize right away that both forms of these names are official, and they become official by being nationally and internationally standardized. Most countries have and use both forms, although in terms of frequency, short names are typically being used. But there are some countries that do not use both forms of these names and basically use short names also as their formal names. Examples, or some of the examples, include Hungary, Romania, Ukraine in Europe, Japan, Canada, New Zealand, and there are more countries like that. There are also countries that do not have internationally standardized and recognized short names in English. Examples include the Dominican Republic, which has the short name recognized in Spanish, for example, Dominicana, the Central African Republic, and I think these are the only 2 countries that do not have even an official short names. The United States and the United Kingdom do not have internationally standardized short names for various reasons, although both countries use short names unofficially. We'll talk about that later on. South Korea and North Korea, these are basically informal short or geographical names, but they are not internationally recognized either. And there are more countries like that. Now, these 2 forms of names obviously differ in how they are being used at what occasions, and consequently in the frequency of their use. In most cases, short names are being used during basically normal life, everyday speech, in the media, and so on. Now, for example, the European Union, in its English style guidelines, is basically advising writers and speakers of all European Union institutions how to use country names. And it says, as you can see down there, in English, the long forms of country names or full names, which means formal names, should not be used in any but the most formal contexts unless there is no accepted short form. Even in international treaties, they should be used sparingly, that is, in the title. So basically, almost never should we use formal names. How country names are standardized? The standardization of country names follows the United Nations methodology, and there are 2 basic steps that need to be followed by each country. First is the process of national standardization. Basically, a country agrees what its name is, and of course, its national language, and also how it is being translated to other languages. And then the result of this national standardization is submitted to the United Nations, and it goes through the process of international standardization. When this international standardization is done, then the name is internationally standardized, recognized, and basically becomes official. Now, in the case of Czechia, the national standardization is governed by 2 acts on surveying and cadastral authorities from 1992 and 1994, and the process is carried out by the Nomenclature Commission of the Czech Office of Surveying and Cadastre. In other words, there's a clearly defined process who determines the country name. So it's not the president, it's not the parliament, it's not the constitution, it's not me, it's not you. It is very clearly act which is or process which is defined by the law. The short name Czechia, and you might be surprised to hear this, was nationally standardized in the spring of 1993 by this commission in cooperation with its 55 linguistic advisors and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think it is important to emphasize that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was part of this process right from the very beginning. And the process of standardization determined the short name of the country, of the newly created country in the Czech language, which is Česko, and its translations into United Nations official languages, including English. And in English, it is Czechia. And you can see the publication which published basically the outcome of the national standardization in 1993, according to the United Nations methodology right here. And I have to emphasize here how Czechia is being correctly pronounced in English. It is with K, as in a cat, and as in the word Czech or Czechoslovakia, because I often hear some people, Czechs, pronounce it as Czechia, which is not a correct pronunciation in English. So the short name of the Czech Republic was standardized again nationally in 1993, but it took more than 2 decades, 23 years to be precise, until 2016 before it was internationally standardized. What it means is that the short name Czechia is here to stay. It also means that since 1993, all these discussions, all these articles about the form, correctness, or spelling of the short name, about how the short name should be translated into English, all these discussions have been more or less pointless and irrelevant, because these discussions are not, or were not, going to change the outcome of the national and international standardization. So let's talk more about the short name Czechia. Now, Czechia as a country is composed of 3 historic regions: Bohemia, Moravia, and the Czech part of Silesia. It is important to emphasize that Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia are regional names and are basically similar or equivalent to regional names that are being used in other countries. We have Bavaria, for example, and Saxony in Germany, Andalusia in Spain, Tyrol, Upper and Lower Austria in Austria, and so on. And despite some people arguing that Czechia is a synonym of Bohemia, it's obviously not the case. And we can see this on the map. So you may ask, why was Czechia nationally standardized in 1993 as a short name? Why was it any other name? Now, Czechia as a short name in English meets all the United Nations requirements for a country name. And these requirements basically are that the name should be, or needs to be, factually and linguistically correct, that it needs to be unambiguous, and it must not be contradicted or opposed by United Nations members. I'm sure that all of you can recall the story of the name of North Macedonia. Country wanted to call itself Macedonia, but it was opposed by Greece. And for a quarter of the century, this prevented Macedonia from internationally standardize its name. And only after there was a compromise reached and country basically agreed, and the Greeks agreed that it would be North Macedonia, then the name of North Macedonia was internationally recognized. Now, Česko in Czech is a short name that was standardized in 1993. You may ask, why Česko? Well, because Česko was part of the name of the former country of Czechoslovakia, which in Czech was called Československo. And originally, Československo was spelled with a hyphen for about 2 years. And clearly, in this name, the term Česko referred to the western part of the country, which was composed of these historic regions of Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia. So Česko did not refer to Bohemia only. Now, why was Czechia then selected? Well, because Czechia is the most faithful translation of the word Česko into English, and because the word Czechia actually has a very long history. It has been used in Latin and then in English for almost 500 years. And of course, alternative short names were considered in 1993, but they were rejected. So what was considered? Bohemia. Now we already know that it's only one of 3 historic regions of Czechia, and that it is not a translation of the word Česko, but it is the translation of Bohemia, or in the Czech, the word Čechy. So it was not acceptable. Czechland has been suggested, which is not a translation of the word Česko, and it basically means Czech land, which does not necessarily include Moravia or Silesia. So again, it's not necessarily factually correct, does not necessarily cover the old territory of Czechia or the Czech Republic. Czech land would be similar to Poland, obviously. Then the Czech lands, which would be similar to the Netherlands. Again, it's not a translation of the word Česko. And I was told that the United Nations would ask, where are these lands in your country? And although these are historic lands, they have not been used since 1949. So for that reason, the Czech lands was also basically rejected. So let's talk about the history of the word, because I have heard many people saying, I can't use it because the former President Zeman came up with this name, or thought up this name, or it's a new name that has never been used. No one has ever heard of it, which is not true. The first usage that has been documented of Czechia comes from Latin, and it was from 1541. Here we have the example of the usage of Latin from 1575. And by the end of the 16th century, there have been hundreds of cases that were documented of the usage of the word Czechia in Latin, referring to the territory of contemporary Czechia. In terms of English, it is interesting that the 1625 edition of Peter Heylyn's book, Microcosmos, A Little Description of the Great World, used the word Czechians, spelled this way, which obviously comes from the short name Czechia. And in its form as Czechia, there is a documented use in English in 1795, then in the 19th century, when Czechoslovakia broke up in 1939 before World War II. The English-speaking press has used term Czechia for the western part of then former Czechoslovakia. So there is a history, long history of the usage of Czechia in English, although of course it has not been maybe as prevalent as Czechoslovakia. Now, some people argue that Czechia is unusual, that it is linguistically incorrect. No, it is not the case. It's one example of geographic name that comes originally from Latin. Here's the list of countries that use names that originated in Latin and that have the same ending with IA. There are even more regional names around the world that use, of course, IA endings, and it includes historic regions of Czechia, Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia, and also former Czechoslovakia. So there's the historical evidence, and these are the reasons why this name was eventually nationally standardized in 1993 for the newly created Czech Republic. However, when the country was created, when Czechoslovakia broke up, there was a clear confusion about the short name of the new country. And this article from the International Herald Tribune, which was published on January 3rd, 1993, just 3 days after the breakup of the former Czechoslovakia, basically admitted that even the country's leaders concede that they need a less formal name for use by both themselves and foreigners. So journalists asked the foreign minister of the first government of an independent country, Czechia, Josef Zelenec, what the short name of the Czech Republic would be. And he said, our traditional name is Czechland, and in the future, we will use this name. So they wrote it down, the reporters, but then Mr. Zelenec, as the article says, cleared his throat and resumed speaking. Of course, he said it could also be Czechia. So it wasn't really clear what short country name will be used. And eventually, in the spring of 1993, as I said, Czechia was nationally standardized following the law. And after this national standardization, for a short time, Czechia was actually used. We have screenshots from the World Championship in biathlon in 1993. Obviously, it was winter, so it was early months of 1993. And Czechia was used. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at that time recommended, but it did not require, Czech embassies around the world to use the short name Czechia. By the end of 1993, the short name disappeared and was replaced by the Czech Republic. Reportedly, politicians or political representatives instructed Czech embassies not to use Czechia, especially in Great Britain and the United States. And as you can see on this picture, it took actually 31 years for biathlon to use Czechia again on the international stage in 2024. One problem that had kind of long-term consequences was that the Czech Republic basically failed to submit the outcome of the national standardization to the United Nations. And eventually only the short name in Czech was internationally standardized and included in the list of short country names, as you can see here. But its translations into languages of the United Nations were not internationally standardized, so it defaulted to the form of the short name, which was basically the formal name, which of course is not correct. Now, you may ask, why was this the case? Why did the country fail to internationally standardize its short name, which was standardized nationally? The reasons are obvious. Now, the word Česko in Czech has been perceived by most Czechs as the stop or torso from the word Československo in Czech or Czechoslovakia, which was used as one word name or short name for the former country of Czechoslovakia. And this was clearly expressed by the former president or the first president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, who set the social norm in rejecting the short country name, both in Czech and consequently also in English. Already in March 1990, he said, Slovakia is a country, but I don't know what Česko or Czechia is. In the letters of readers, slugs crawled over my skin when I saw this term. In January 1998, he repeated, slugs crawl over my skin a little when I read or hear the word. I'll be the last one to use it. Reportedly in 2006, however, he declared that he was going to write his play Leaving in the US because he can't concentrate on it enough in Czechia. He said that in Czech. So obviously he was not the last one to use the short name. And of course, President Havel was popular. He was well respected. So people believed what he said. But he was no expert on country names, right? He basically expressed what he liked or disliked. He disliked the short name for personal reasons. So the only argument against the short name, which has been repeated for a quarter of the century, both in Czech and in English, has been, I don't like it, which basically means I'm not used to it. And I think it's important to mention that similar arguments about the short name of Czechoslovakia were used in the early 1990s, both in Czech and English. Here is the example from the National Geographic magazine that in 1921 said or labeled the name Czechoslovakia being awful and an unfair handicap for the country of Czechoslovakia. However, the name used, and in many countries, even today, people remember Czechoslovakia, although they do not recognize the Czech Republic and they do not recognize Czechia. So you might ask, what's wrong with using only the Czech Republic? It doesn't matter if we use two words or only one word for a country. Again, there are countries whose short names are two-word names. Well, first of all, using the formal name for all occasions basically defied the established international practice. And the second problem, which is even more important by far, is that English speakers tend to shorten the Czech Republic to all kinds of forms. The most prevalent is shortening it to Czech, and there are other forms. Now, of course, all of you know that Czech is an adjective, the Czech is nationality, the Czech is the name of the language, but it's not the country name, it's simply incorrect. So that's one problem. The second problem is that, if you look at this list of how the Czech Republic is being shortened, you have maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 different forms. If you think about this, there are more than 200 countries around the world. For an average person, we would be really lucky if they remember one form of a country name to identify a particular country. How should they remember 8 or 10 form of the name for a small country, relatively small country, such as Czechia. So that's a major problem that leads and led to confusion abroad, which I would argue has prevented and still prevents in many cases global recognition and building the country brand. Now, let me go back here. So, of course, it's not that only foreigners have been shortening it. The Czechs have been doing that, right? So we have the examples in sports using Czech, Pilsner Urquell, the most well-known Czech beer, brewed in Pilsen, Czech. In sports, Czech was used, or even Czechia in the 1990s, as we can see right here. So what are the advantages of using Czechia compared to the Czech Republic? Well, it's shorter, it's more concise, which ultimately is easier to remember and use. It improves international recognition and if used consistently, it reduces confusion abroad, what the short form of the country name is, and it helps standardize the country's branding. In sports and cultural events, of course, it is more suitable for international use because that's what other countries use that have short names. It's more appealing for businesses, advertisers, investors, because it's shorter and easier to incorporate in product names, logos, maps, and marketing material. Again, countries typically use short names if they have them, so it followed this international practice, and it provides a unique and distinctive identity, which ultimately benefit tourism, business, and international relations. And compared to the Czech Republic, it can be applied to the country's entire history, which is long. It spans for more than 1,000 years. Some people argue nearly 1,200 years. So it took until 2016 that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs finally recognized the advantages of the short name. And after it was approved by the Czech government, basically submitted the short name Czechia and in other languages used by the United Nations for the international standardization. So it happened in 2016, and since July 5th, 2016, Czechia is listed in the official list of country names, short country names, and also formal country names. And since 2016, it has been correct in those country name lists at the United Nations. Now, you might think, finally, the problem has been solved. Is this the end of story? Unfortunately, it was not the end of the story. And as you see on this cartoon, there was a backlash of many people in the media, in Czechia and abroad, who did not like the standardization, the international standardization of the short name Czechia. So what happened? Well, first of all, I think there was a complete failure of the Czech state to follow up on this international standardization and start using it. So the government officials, with the exception of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, teachers, for example, and others, were not informed about the international standardization of Czechia, were not really educated or informed about the advantages and importance of using Czechia. This was not really explained clearly. And the state, the Czech state, refused to use any leverage on state organizations, on ministries, on sports associations, or schools to start using the short country name. The use of Czechia was declared to be voluntary, basically meaning that it was ignored by the state, and as a result, not much has changed after the international standardization of the short name. So the state and its institutions and its politicians, representatives continue to use the Czech Republic, ignored mostly Czechia, which of course consequently led to the continuing distortions of the former name. The situation was so bad that in 2018, the daily Lidové noviny declared Czechia being dead in the water. And one of its commentators here in the editorial basically said at the end of his article, it does not matter what country name we use. And also notice how Czechia was basically, the short name was misspelled. It was basically written in Czech. And of course, I'm convinced that this is completely wrong, that this commentator is completely wrong. I actually replied to that article in 2018. So despite the arguments or claims that by the media in Czechia and also abroad, that Czechia did not basically catch on, that nobody used it, it started to spread slowly abroad. So for example, Google's used it since 2017. The European has been using Czechia since 2018 when it was included in its interinstitutional style guide. The US Department of State is using Czechia or has used Czechia. CIA World Factbook used Czechia. Eurostat and Statista and other statistical databases use Czechia. Your phone is using Czechia, whether it's Apple or whether it's Android or Xiaomi, they use Czechia. Various applications also use Czechia, such as Twitter, Strava. Lonely Planet has switched to Czechia. Euronews use Czechia. However, here in Czechia itself, the progress has been slow, including the office of the president. So the former president's office used CR. Maybe you know that CR is the internationally standardized two-letter code for Costa Rica. So that's a problem. Another problem is that CR has 228 meanings in English if you Google it. And Czechia is not among top 10, maybe even not top 10 to top 20 meanings that would be listed. So that's confusing. Czechia has only one meaning. And you might think that the situation has changed with the new president. Well, as you can see, they continue to use the CR. Although I checked before the lecture, it did change to the Czech Republic now. So this is no longer current, but up until maybe this year, CR has been used. The Czech politicians and the Czechs have continued to use wrong forms of the country name. So we have the form Czech China used in 2019. You can see the former Czech president being there, Minister of Industry and others. Of course, English speakers know what Czech China means in English. Of course, as I mentioned, Czech is an adjective. In 2020, there was a Czech Senate delegation that visited Taiwan. They used on their badges Czech Taiwan, of course, which is incorrect. It should be Czechia, China, Czechia, Taiwan. Czech Tourism, which is the state tourist authority, basically refused to use the name Czechia for many years and used the formal name, the Czech Republic, for marketing until 2023. So basically, they used all kinds of distortions of the formal name, the Czech Republic, It never worked, but they kept using it. They refused to use the short name Czechia. They even used the term Czech, underlined, until 2022 during their marketing campaign, which again kind of evokes that the country name is Czech, and this is obviously incorrect. So we should not be surprised that foreigners are basically confused. Even the Czech Prime Minister in 2020, instead of promoting Czechia, argued against it in an interview for the Wall Street Journal. It says that during an interview, he was told that somebody had officially changed the name of his country to Czechia, of course, which is complete nonsense. And he said, I didn't know this. I don't like it at all. It's because then you will confuse Czechia, Chechnya. I don't know. I don't like this. We are Czech Republic, of course, without using the, which must be there. We are Czechs. And I don't know who came with such a stupid idea, crazy. Well, Mr. Babiš, as a member of the Czech government, you voted for the international standardization of Czechia on May 2nd, 2016. So it's not true that you've never heard of it. The Czech government continued to use marketing campaigns based on the formal name. They used the marketing campaigns, the slogan Czech Republic, the country for the future. In the original, in Czech, it used the short name, Česko země pro budoucnost. But it was, again, translated into English in some cases as Czech for the future, for example, by the Ministry of Industry. And it was spread by the Deputy Prime Minister on his tweet. Formal names of countries are not used in sports. But it has been used in sports. Either Czech was used or the formal name. But look at what forms. We have a giant Czech and minuscule Republic on the side, which you can see. You can't really see that. Here it's another distortion, a wrapped Czech. And it all evokes that the country name is Czech, not Czechia or the Czech Republic. Czech team, Czech ice hockey team can mean any Czech team. Correctly, countries use team and then they short name. Team Canada, Team Slovakia, then there should be Team Czechia. So it's not surprising that the world thinks that the name of the country is Czech, which is wrong, of course. So here we have the official tweet by the International Olympic Committee after the Czech skier won the gold medal at the Winter Olympics in 2018 in Super G. The country name is Czech, Ledecká Ester. Here we have another example, in this case, Canadians thinking in 2020 that country name is Czech. And it's not only in sports. If you go to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs website and look at the list of countries, these are the European countries. All countries are basically listed by their short name. There's one mistake. The country name of Czechia is listed as Czech, right? Which is incorrect. 2023, this newspaper, Amir sends congratulations to President of Czech. I was at the airport in August, and these are some ads. Czech's favorite beer, not Czechia's. Pilsner Urquell likes to use Czech, or it used for several decades Czechs. Now, this is not in the sense of using the country name. This should be funny, but I don't think it's very funny because, again, it invokes that the short country name is Czech. Here's another example how the Czech Republic is being distorted and misspelled. I don't know why these academics would not ask the journal to spell the country name correctly. I have done, professionally work in the auto industry, and these are some of the German subsidiaries located in Czechia, and in English they use 5 different names of the country, or 5 different forms of the name: Czech, CZ, Bohemia, Czechia, and of course Czech Republic. So how can anyone really remember it all and not being confused, especially foreigners? Now, you may ask why so many people actually continue to refuse using Czechia. There are several reasons that are obvious. Obviously, old habits die hard. The Czech Republic has been used almost exclusively for 25 years, and exclusively for 23 years, and almost exclusively for 30 years. Many people confuse the fact that they are not used to Czechia with not liking it. They would say, it's awful, I don't like it, I'm not gonna use it. What's awful on it? I don't understand. The government, as we know, continued to exclusively use the Czech government, the Czech Republic, the state institutions, Czech politicians, the same way. There have been some exceptions, and the effort by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially since 2022, to start using Czechia, and there have been some concrete results in that. I will get to that. After its standardization in 2016, the international standardization, I have shown that said already that there has been a very slow uptake in sports, international institutions, foreign media before 2000. The short name is not used and taught in schools, either in Czech or in English. Various myths rather than facts have been spread about the short name Czechia by the media. Countless articles basically questioning the name and presenting distorted or sometimes even completely wrong information. It's being similarly spread by politicians, by bureaucrats, by teachers. English teachers in Czechia frequently would basically mark Czechia as being a mistake. If students try to use it, they tell students that it's a nonsense, that it's wrong, that it does not exist in English. And generally has been a failure until recently to recognize the long-term benefits of the short name. And the implications are quite devastating of this for any efforts to build the country name and its brand in the past 31 years. So consequently, neither the Czech Republic nor Czechia is well known around the world. Czechoslovakia is still quite well known, which is interesting, given the fact that this word is much longer than Czechia. It's much more difficult to remember and spell out. But it was used. It was used for 80 years. People got used to it, and they still remember it. And I have to say that, unfortunately, Czechia is by far the least successful country in internationally establishing its country name out of all newly independent countries in Europe since 1990. So to conclude this, let me talk about the most frequent myths and facts about the short name Czechia, which are used by its opponents to basically rationalize for themselves and others why they should not use the short name Czechia. So the first myth is that nobody uses it and that native English speakers do not like to use it. Well, it is wrong because, as we can see, Czechia is used by many global companies, by many international institutions now, by many maps and navigation services, by international statistics, by now also by basically all international sports associations and by some social media. I have already showed you some examples. Here are the examples from sports. Already in 2021, volleyball, you use it in the European Championships in Ostrava. Rugby in 2021, this was on TV. Ice hockey since 2022. Soccer has been using it, and can see the last ice hockey world championship in Czechia, which used the short name, and it was used in the Olympics. And I think if you look at this, it makes sense. Although I have to say that some disciplines used the abbreviation or the three-letter country code CZE instead of Czechia, which I consider to be another in the series of missteps, which was basically done just to avoid using Czechia if the Czech Republic was not going to be used. Because I would argue again that most people around the world will not associate CZE or the Czech flag and the state emblem with the country of Czechia or the Czech Republic. Because, of course, how many people would know all short country codes or three-letter country codes for all countries around the world? Eurovision has been using Czechia. It's important since 2023 because it has millions of viewers. In 2024, the US Secretary of State Blinken at the NATO conference in Prague used in a spoken language Czechia repeatedly, is used by NATO, and can see that it is used correctly, President of Czechia rather than Czech President. It was used by the White House in its basically statement after the visit of the Prime Minister of Czechia, Mr. Fiala, and his meeting with the President Biden, because it's also important that the Prime Minister used the word Czechia in his speech. So it is being used. So the first myth is completely false. The second one, which is very widespread, is that Czechia can be easily confused with Chechnya. Well, it might be the case for some people who are ill-informed that they might confuse it. But the fact is that the Chechen Republic and the Czech Republic are also being confused because they are even more similar than Chechnya and Czechia. And there are some examples of Chechen Republic being confused with Czech Republic here. But maybe more importantly, I would argue that Chechnya is not an independent country. It's one of the administrative regions or republics of Russia. So it means that it does not act as a sovereign or independent entity at the international stage, and such as there is a chance of basically almost zero of actual confusion with Czechia at the international stage. And also importantly, there are many countries that have similar names, and these are independent countries than Czechia and Chechnya. We can see the examples here. Austria, Australia, Iran, Iraq, Slovakia, Slovenia, and so on and so on. Some years ago, the US President George W. Bush confused Austria with Australia in some official capacity. Now, in none of these cases, any of these countries have given up their short name and use their formal name or political name exclusively just because someone might possibly confuse the country with some other country. This really doesn't make any sense. It's not a good argument. Myth number 3, the Czech Republic has become widespread in English-speaking world, it is pointless to try to convince English speakers about using Czechia. Well, the fact is that it's basically up to us, Czechs, to start using Czechia more frequently, and then the English-speaking world will adapt, as it adapted with some, country names that were relatively recently introduced. Belarus, Zimbabwe, Bangladesh, Eritrea, or Croatia. As I already explained, the Czech state and its institutions have only used the Czech Republic before 2016. And also, so that's a reason why English speakers use it as well. And the one-word equivalent of Czechia has been commonly used in all Germanic languages except for English. So there it's not really a problem. I have also heard Czechia can be pronounced as Czechia. English speakers pronounce it as Czechia, and as a result, that's a wrong name and should not be used. Well, I would argue, and I already said at the beginning of this lecture, if you can pronounce Czech, you can pronounce Czechia, right? With K. It is pronounced with K. And in English, there are many words, exactly 286, in which CH is being pronounced as K. School, architect, ache, anarchy, chemistry, chaos, epoch, mechanism, and others. What it means is that English speakers simply must learn the pronunciation of these words, including Czech and Czechia. And I would argue again, if they can pronounce Czech Republic, they can pronounce Czechia, you can just tell them, well, it's Czechia, not Czechia. Then people argue that Czechia sounds strange in English, and because it sounds strange, we should not use it. But again, we already know that it is derived from Latin, which is common for 1/4 of all country names. And it might sound unusual for some people who never heard it before. But other country names might also sound strange when they are heard, by people for the first time. Lithuania, Czechoslovakia in the past, Croatia, Belarus, Zimbabwe, take a pick. There are other countries that exclusively use formal names without any problems. Well, the fact is that countries that have short names use these short names. And it's usually authoritarian and often internationally unrecognized and fictitious countries that insist on using exclusively formal names in order to increase the international legitimacy. So we have the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, we have the Donetsk People's Republic, the Luhansk People's Republic, we have the Republic of Srpska, and others. Obviously, Czechia is not in the same category. Or there are countries that do not have an international standardized short name in English, such as the Dominican Republic, the Central African Republic, and then they would use or are forced to use the formal names exclusively. The United States and the United Kingdom are also two-word country names. So, therefore, the Czech Republic is fine. We can use it similarly as the United States and the United Kingdom. Well, as we already know, it's not about the number of words in the name. It's about the word being, the country name being either political or formal or short or geographic, right? So, just to make this short, the United States and the United Kingdoms are actually shortened formal names. You know that the formal name is the United States of America and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And also, you probably would agree, and it is the case, that in everyday communication, both countries are usually recognized by the unofficial geographic names, America and Great Britain or Britain, or they shorten political names, the United States, the US, the USA, the United Kingdom, or the UK. I would argue, and I think it is the case, that these countries, both the US and Britain, are much more known worldwide than the Czech Republic. And in a way, they can afford to use these shortened political name. But Czechia does not have well-known, unique, and internationally recognized abbreviation. And obviously, the Czech Republic did not work well in terms of country branding for the past quarter of the century. Myth number 9, Czechia has the same meaning as Bohemia. It excludes the regions of Moravia and Silesia from the Czech Republic. Of course, we already talked about that, so this myth can be refuted easily. I'm not going to repeat that. Another myth, the general public should decide about the short country name, Czechia, ideally through a referendum. Well, we talked about how the country name is being determined by the legal process of standardization. And of course, how do you want to ask the Czech public in a referendum to basically decide about its short name in English if about 80% of the Czechs don't speak any English? Doesn't make any sense. Then it's being argued that Czechia is an imprecise historical name because the Czech state had not used it in the past and has used different names instead. Well, again, I have already argued that the short or geographic name refers to a particular territory, regardless of its current or previous state forms. And there are numerous countries around the world, for example, Egypt, Greece, Poland, Germany, for example, that use short geographic names, even though they experience major territorial changes in the past throughout their history. So I think this could be, again, this myth could be refuted. Czechia could be used as a timeless name, referring not only to today's state since 1993, but to historic formations that existed on the territory of the current state. Some people argue another myth. Česko is not mentioned in the Constitution. Therefore, its English translation cannot be the official country name. Well, the fact is that short country names do not have to be spelled out in the Constitution in order to become official. Our neighbor Slovakia does not have its short name mentioned in the Constitution, but it's still being used. Czechoslovakia was not mentioned in the 1920 and 1948 Czechoslovak institutions, and it was used as well. And of course, we already know that the country names become official through their national and international standardization, not through the usage in their constitutions. Number 13, Czechia is less representative than the Czech Republic, and it is confusing because it's ambiguous. So some people argue it is much more noble name to use. We tell the world that we are the Republic, and I am proud of it. Well, there are 150 countries that have Republic in their formal names, and they don't really feel that they need to spell this out or mention it every time they use a country name. In terms of this ambiguity, actually the opposite is true. Czechia is unambiguous in both spoken and written English. As I mentioned, Republic is used in formal name of 150 countries, and as all of you know, Czech in English has several meanings, which could be confusing. So the Czechs would say sometimes, I'm going to Czech next week. Well, you might ask in English, an English speaker would immediately ask, what are you going to Czech next week? Right? Because it has completely different meaning. Number 14, the name change would be too expensive. It would be harmful by interrupting the continuity of the Czech Republic. Well, first of all, there has been no name change involved. Both formal name and the short name are still official names of the country. And as we could see, the introduction of the use of Czechia has been very gradual. So there were minimal or no expenses involved. Myth number 15, the name of Czechia is a neologism, a newly coined word. Well, we already know, and I talked about it, that the first mention of Czechia in Latin is since 1541. So it's not true. And we also saw that, for example, the US newspapers used it before 1918 and 1960 to refer to the western part of Czechoslovakia. And finally, Czechia is too similar to German Czechai that was used by Nazi Germany, and especially their leader, whom I'm not going to name, as a derogatory term or name for occupied Czechia during the Second World War. Well, Czechia in English is unrelated to German term Czechai. There's different pronunciation. Germans had used Czechai before the Nazi period. Czechai is not used today. Basically, it's Czechian, as all of you probably know. And actually, in terms of the word itself, there's nothing wrong with it because it's a way how German is naming countries. For example, Slovakia and Turkey have similar endings. Okay, so how you should approach this, what I would consider to be a professional approach. Well, first of all, you need to familiarize yourself with the facts about the short name and do not believe various myths. This is, I think, hopefully been addressed at least partially by this lecture. Using like, dislike, I dislike the name is not a very good criterion. I think it's a sign of unprofessionalism, especially if you're representing the state in any professional capacity. Basically, learn to use Czechia, start using it, and over time it will become very natural, especially when you are representing the state. Follow the established practice of using names of other countries. How do you use the country name of France or Spain or Norway? Use the short country name and formal name of Czechia the same way. So if you talk of the Kingdom of Spain or the Kingdom of the Netherlands or the French Republic, then of course use the Czech Republic. But if you use Spain, France, Norway, Germany, use Czechia. Please do not use Czech or CR and other abbreviations in English, which is very harmful. Please do not discourage foreigners from using Czechia. It has been, I've heard that so many times, English speakers telling me, well, I tried to use Czechia, but my Czech friends said that it was completely wrong and that we, the Czechs, do not like it. Instead, explain them why Czechia is the correct name, and also follow the guidelines of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Basically become familiar with those guidelines. They are very clear and explain everything that you should know. So I will conclude this with basically, I think it's not the question whether Czechia will catch on and prevail. It's just the matter of time. So the question is how long it will take. Overall, I think the problem is that it's just a matter of getting used to it and recognizing the importance of the short country name for its international branding, for its reputation, for its international recognition. So if you like the country, if you are Czech, if you want this country to be known around the world, learn to use its short name. So, and of course, you can help if you are a foreigner as well by using Czechia the same way you use short names of other countries in English. So that's all. I apologize for a longer lecture than I expected, but I hope it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now there is a time for discussion, for your questions, comments, ideas. Please, I would like to encourage you.
I am
Okay, please.
Lars.
I cannot hear you.
Thank you for the interesting lecture. I'm sorry. My name is Lars. I'm from Ukraine. I'm the president of the Czechian, Slovakian, Hungarian parties. Thank you, the interesting Mr. Peter. Thank you for the interesting lecture. I have a question. When do you think the name Czech Republic first appeared?
When it first appeared? The name. Well,
when do you think the name Czech Republic first appeared?
It appeared first, actually in 1969, when former Czechoslovakia became a federation. It was recognized that it is composed of two parts: the Czech Socialist Republic and the Slovak Socialist Republic. So it was used in that in that capacity since 1969, but not without the word socialist. And then it was used since 1993. But it was not used before that. At least I'm not familiar with any historical usage of Czech Republic before 1969. I might be wrong, but there is no really historical record before 1969 I am aware of. Maybe some of the listeners and participants might answer that question better than I do.
Thank you. That's a good question.
Okay, thank you. I see there Mr. Hruza would like to ask, please.
Good afternoon. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I liked it very much, Professor Pavlinek. I wrote, by the way, in the chats that I used the word Czechian in German in Vienna already in 1968. It was the year of my immigration from former Czechoslovakia to Austria. And then I hope very much that you would make a future session on the theme of OVA for the ladies of foreign countries. Why? Because my wife is from Finland. His surname was Suomalainen, and if I told her, well, in Czechia you would be Suomalainen Ova, so he was shocked. She was shocked, and the same. Very many sportswomen in Czech Republic. There is a chaos. If you call Germans, Finns, and so on with Ova, they very often they don't understand. They should go to the start. Thank you very much, and it was perfect. Thank you.
I would just say that this is a completely different topic than the country name. I'm not an expert on spelling and OVA names, so I would leave this to the linguists, and I would focus on the country name instead here.
Thank you. I would like to suggest that Česká centra, we prepared a lecture about this topic already last month, but it is in Czech. So it is for those who speak Czech. And you can find it in our archive. Please, Mr. Paul.
Hello there. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was a really interesting and comprehensive overview of the history of this subject, which is a thorny subject, and among those that follow the fate of the Czech Republic, or Czechia in English, is one that comes up regularly. So I work as a translator, including from Czech into English. I work at the European Commission's translation service in the English language department, so I regularly translate Czech into English. And the document that you quoted from at the start, I was pleased to see that. So I work in that department that produces that style guide that you mentioned. So this is a question that we have to confront quite a lot. Let me say before, I've got sort of a couple of questions and a couple of comments. Sorry if it takes a bit of time. But before I do that, I'll say that I use Czechia myself outside my professional life. I've reconciled myself to it. I can't say I do it particularly willingly, but I was fed up with using the Czech Republic all the time and having to use all those syllables. I didn't like switching to Czechia. You said that it's a myth that English native speakers don't like it. Not in my experience. A lot of my English native speaker colleagues that have been asked to use Czechia do not like it. Now, it may be that they are people who have familiarity with the country and its predecessor country, and therefore they know that this is, in some ways, you've demonstrated, isn't in some ways a neologism. It may be that outside that group of people that are not so familiar, haven't had historical contact with the country, maybe for them it's not so unpleasant, but it really very strongly among the English speakers that I associate with and that know Czechia, they really don't like it, and many still refuse to use it. And I find it interesting why they don't. I was the same. I didn't like using the name. I decided to start using it through gritted teeth to see how long it would take before it didn't feel unpleasant coming out of my mouth. And it took about 2 years. So I do use it now. I can't say, however, that I like it. And I don't advocate others using it if they don't like it. You said about Czechia and about the potential pronunciation of Czechia. Whenever I have arguments with colleagues who make that argument, they say it's too much like Chechnya, and people might start calling it Czechia. I always thought it was very unlikely. But I've heard a lot of people, as Czechia has started to become more commonly used, for instance, at the Olympics, I've heard native English speakers, ones I really would never have expected to mispronounce the name. I've heard them say Czechia, including on the BBC, the British, I'm British originally, the British television coverage of the Olympics. One of the commentators, Steve Backley, commenting on the javelin, said Czechia. And that's surprising because Steve Backley was one of Jan Železny's biggest competitors. So he should know the country and should know how to pronounce it. But even he pronounced it Czechia on broadcast during the Olympics. So I think that's probably going to be more common a problem than maybe that you imagine. I won't go through the whole list of things I said, but Czechland and the Czechlands. You said they're not a translation of Czechia. Of Česko. I'm not sure why not. I don't like them and I wouldn't use them. I'm not sure why they're not a translation, though. I think they could easily be a translation if we decided they were. And I'll only conclude with this. So the gentleman, I don't know if he's still in the call, but from the foreign ministry, who's promoting Czechia, a big part of my work is translating documents that come from Czech ministries that are sent to the European Commission, and we are translating them into English for internal consumption, almost entirely, not for external publication. We extremely rarely see Česko used in those documents, even documents that have a less formal character. So when we are getting documents to say Česká republika, Česká republika, Česká republika, it's quite difficult for us to translate that as Czechia. If we see abbreviated forms, we very rarely see Česko. We see CR, and we never translate that as CR, so we don't do that. And then sometimes perhaps we would use Czechia. But as I say, even among my colleagues, there's a sort of unwillingness to use it unless really we see Česko there in our Czech texts. Sorry for taking up that time, but I found it very interesting. Thank you so much.
So if I may react real quick, I understand that your colleagues basically say they do not like it, but I also said that people basically confuse that they are not used to something and they say that they don't like it. It's just, old habits die hard. They are used to the Czech Republic because they used it for 25 years or 30 years. So there's nothing wrong with the word Czechia itself. They just have to learn it. And I have never argued that I like personally, Czechia, or I don't like it, but it's the national and internationally standardized short name of the country in English. So I have learned, as you did, to use it. In terms of the pronunciation of Czechia as Czechia, I didn't say that people do not pronounce it the same way. I heard it myself during the Olympics. The commentator, I think it was swimming, pronounced Czechia maybe for 2 days, but eventually someone told her it's not Czechia, it's Czechia. And I have argued, well, English speakers must learn it the same they are learning to pronounce CH in other words, in chemistry and chaos and school. So if they can pronounce, Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, they can pronounce Czechia. And it's maybe, I don't know, maybe not in this case. You were talking about that they are not familiar with the country and they just pronounce it the way they read it, and they think it's like cheese. So we would pronounce it Czechia. And the Czechland and the Czechlands, well, the point is that the commission that is basically given the task according to the law to decide what the short name is, decided that the Czechlands or Czechland is not the correct translation of the word Česko. And in Czech, Česko cannot be easily translated as České země or Česká země. Czechia, I think, works better. And also, I'm sure that they look at how other Germanic languages were translating Česko into German, for example, or, into, I don't know, Dutch or Swedish or, Norwegian, other Germanic languages. And it's not the Czechland. There's only one exception to that, which is Icelandic language, if I'm correct. Other Germanic languages, all of them used the equivalent of Czechia. So if I wasn't there, of course, during those deliberations, but I'm sure that these almost 60 people, or more than 60 people who were deciding about this or who were considering this, that they probably and most likely considered all these facts when basically determining what the official translation should be. And since it has been standardized. As I say, or as I said already, there's basically no point 30 years later to be discussing what the correct form of the short name should be. It's been settled in 1993. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I can see Mr. Sadílek.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Pavlinek. It's been a very interesting lecture, and I fully support your view. And it's sad to see that so many government institutions, sport institutions are making so much trouble to accept this new name. My question is, how is the experience with other countries like Germany, France, Italy, or Spain, where there is also the short version? Is there a similar experience as with the English, or is it somewhat better? Is there any reflection in those countries on our new short name?
Yeah, I think I have already mentioned other Germanic languages typically use the short version. Czechian is being used in Germany. This summer, I traveled in France for 2 weeks. And, when people would ask me in French where I was from, and I used La Czechie, everyone knew. So obviously the name is known, although sometimes we are being told again that no one is using it. The only time when actually there was a question about it was when a French person was speaking in English and asked us, where are you from? And we said, well, we are from Czechia. And he said, okay, you mean the Czech Republic. So it did not really come up in French. They didn't really, try to specify that La Czechie was actually the Czech Republic. It only came up in English. So, and, going back to the previous, to Paul, the matter is, this is the problem of the Czechs. If Czechs were using Czechia from day one, from 1993, we would not be having this discussion. There would be no problems. English speakers will not have problems getting used to Czechia because they would use it the same way as Croatia. I mean, Croatia is an excellent example of this. It's a smaller country with a smaller population. It's also a republic, but around the world, I would argue Croatia is much better known than Czechia. And if you say someone, I'm going to Croatia, I've been to Croatia, people know for whatever reason. But, I met people who never heard of, I met Dutch people who never heard of the Czech Republic. They never heard of Czechia, never. And you can see that also, I encountered that in the US as well. So Czechia is not such a big country that, can use all kinds of abbreviations and the names. But again, it has been the problem of the Czechs. So despite the fact that the interinstitutional guideline specifies that we should use short country names, the Czech institutions would be still submitting the reports and materials to the European Commission that would use the formal name and its abbreviations. And I think, I would have, if I was there, I would say, well, you need to follow the interinstitutional style guide because actually I have a friend who is working in one of the institutions. And when I talked to him years ago about Czechia, he said, if I use Czechia in my report, it is being corrected or replaced with the Czech Republic automatically because Czechia is not allowed by the interinstitutional style guide. So, I'm wondering why, when in the original, the Czech Republic is being used, why you do not follow the interinstitutional style guide and do not follow the practice you use for other countries. The short names are being used. Okay.
Thank you.
Paul, would you like to ask another question?
Yes. Since nobody else is putting their hand up, I don't want to hog things, but yeah, on that last subject, if I understood Professor Pavlinek, what you were saying, I was in Prague earlier this year as part of a delegation of European Commission officials on a so-called study visit, and we met with the European Affairs Office of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and at the end of the first session there was a Q&A, and all of my colleagues, when they were asking about the country, used Czechia. They didn't say speaking English, they were asking questions in English. Now, as I was observing this, I thought, now that's interesting, because I still don't think it's so well established that everybody so far has used Czechia. And we weren't briefed in advance that we had to use Czechia whenever we were asking questions. We hadn't got that far in terms of sort of thought police and so on. But everybody naturally used Czechia. And one of the people from the ministry in his response said, I'm very pleased to hear, he said, I'm very pleased and I'm very surprised to notice that you are all using the correct short form of our name in English. So I think slowly it's coming through. The question I had was about the decision in '93. You said that around that time, or shortly after, that people, or sort of the Czech government, discouraged the use of Czechia, or certain elements discouraged the use of Czechia in English. Was that connected to the war in Chechnya, which did at that time, or shortly afterwards, 94 perhaps, was it? I remember it because it was happening when I myself had just moved to live in Slovakia, and I had actually never heard of that part of the world before, so it was a new name to me. But it suddenly Chechnya became very internationally well known because of the war. Do you think that's linked to, or that was one of the reasons why people were discouraged from using Czechia in English for the Czech Republic?
I would say that perhaps originally in 1993, it was not the reason. However, later on, in maybe, the mid-late 1990s, it was one of the contributing factors. I mean, the story is that there was some international exhibition in, I think, Hanover, somewhere in Germany, and that someone misspelled, or that one letter fell off from the country name and it was misspelled, and they thought that it was Chechnya, and there was a big kind of a surprise and uproar in the Czech media and the press, and so they tried to avoid this from happening. And this confusion, but as I said, Austria didn't say, "Oh, the U.S. president has confused that with Australia. We should not use the name." I had a colleague who regularly, and he is educated geographer, mixes up Slovenia and Slovakia. Of course, people mix up Iran and Iraq, all these countries. I don't think it's a good reason for stop using the short name, given the advantages of the short name. So the advantages are enormous. And obviously, I think we can safely say that after 30 years, the insistence on the Czech Republic in terms of the branding of the country and its use and being recognized abroad has not really worked well. And again, as I said, Czechia has been the least successful of all these newly created countries in the usage of its short name and proper use of its short name. There is no case that is similar to that. And even after North Macedonia has been finally established, the usage of Fyrom disappeared, and North Macedonia is being used by both North Macedonians and foreigners. So I would argue that, again, the problem has always been with the name internal. It's the Czech problem, internal problem in terms of the usage of the short name in Czech, and also it kind of affected the usage in English, and that it is the Czechs themselves who have to start using the short name, and the rest of the world, including your colleagues, if they see the Czechs are using it, they will adapt. They will adapt. That's how it worked for other countries, and that's how it's going to work for this country as well, and its name.
Well, if we see Česko in the documents we receive, it will be easier, but we are already doing it to an extent.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I think we have time for last question. I see Daniel Straka-Finley, please. Please turn on your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I would like to first thank the Czech Center for organizing this. So thank you for organizing this lecture, and I would like to thank Dr. Pavlínek for a wonderful presentation and everyone who participated in this and provided questions. I have a couple of notes for, or maybe answers for Paul. The reason I believe we chose Czechia as a country to use the ending IA, which is a Latin ending for the land of, basically what precedes it, so Czechia, the land of the Czechs, Slovakia, the land of Slovaks, is because in the entirety of our history, we've always used English names derived from Latin, whether it's Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia, Lusatinia, Ruthenia, Slovakia, and we've lived under Austrian rule, which is Austria for many, many years. So it's more like a historical continuation of the name. I live in Canada, and I've lived in North America for a very long time, and I know that the terms Czechoslovakia and Czech Republic have been well used, and the reason for that is very, very, very simple. Both of the words were so unusual and so difficult that they have made it to the English language books of America and Canada. So basically kids had to memorize it, just like in Czech we learn strč prst skrz krk. They had to learn this crazy word called Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic, and they were tested on it. And believe me, till this very day, many ordinary Americans and Canadians have a hard time saying the word Czechoslovakia. I've heard so many different mispronunciation of Czechoslovakia, whether it was Czechoslovakia or all sorts of different permutations that I can think of. And very often when I arrived in 2000 in America, they confused Czechoslovakia, that didn't even exist anymore for many years, with Yugoslavia. And when I said I was from the Czech Republic, they were worried, like, how are my relatives in Yugoslavia, even though that war was long over. So our country has generally had a problem with our own name. And until Czechia makes it to the books, both in Czechia and abroad, just like Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic did, we will continue having to teach English speakers how to use Czechia properly. I have some very positive news from Canada. The Canadian government and Canadian media overwhelmingly starting to use Czechia in all documents. There are still here and there the off case where Czech Republic is used, And then I already see my friends and colleagues come to me and say, why does this newspaper use Czech Republic when it's clearly Czechia now and it's been for many years? So I'm very pleased that I keep hearing now from Americans and Canadians saying, you know, it's Czechia now. Why does this newspaper use Czech Republic? And I believe that since the foreign ministry has started doing such a great job in promoting Czechia, and there's still more work to be done for all the embassies to start using it, I believe that it's made a really positive impact. And now we can see it in social media, in books are using Czechia, and it's just usage. And I believe if we continue confidently say to speakers, whoever they say Czechia, or they're confused whether they use Czechia or Czech Republic, calmly, happy, and positively say, it's Czechia, it's pronounced Czechia. And that learning moment for them is exactly the moment where they will not make the mistake again. And if they make it again, make it a joke, say it's Czechia. Imagine Czech, like you are writing a check, and perhaps, I don't know, the car maker Kia, Czechia. And then they will remember it. Just give them a little bit of a way how they can learn in their brain, visualize it, and then they will not have a problem with it. Czech Republic, Czechia, and then we're on a good way to implementation. So thank you again, everyone, for participating in this. I made a bunch of notes which have obviously magically disappeared. I believe that I would like to comment on Hitler and Czechia. The reason why Hitler would call us Czechai, it's just simply because that's how we were called at that time. Just like Hitler addressed Slovakia, but Slovakia, because that's how Slovakia was called then. Frankreich, Österreich, Poland, none of these countries have backed out of using their own country names just because Hitler used it. That just seems like a completely crazy thing that in 1993 we said, oh my God, Hitler used Czechai, we must run away from it and not use it. As I said, we need to be confident about our name. Just like Austrians have to 100 times a day explain that Vienna is not the capital of Australia, or Slovaks and Slovenes are having a good time saying, you know, it's not Slovakia in Slovenia and vice versa. Let's be proud of our beautiful name. It's been, you know, hundreds of years that it's been used. In fact, in Renaissance, there was a big push to use Czechia because it was the land of the Czechs. We were no longer the Celtic tribe Bohi, from which Bohemia derived. Bohemia just means the land of the Celtic tribe Bohi, who are long gone. So they wanted, in the Renaissance of the Czech language and the Czech nation, to use Czechia in Latin and English in other languages, because we are the land of the Czechs. We speak Czech, and it's a unifying factor of our country. And anytime I explain this to my friends and colleagues and strangers alike during conferences, people overwhelmingly love the term Czechia. They no longer have to say, oh God, the Czech Republic or the adjective Czech, because, you know, many of my colleagues are very grammatically attuned to the love of the language, and Czechia just seems so royal and beautiful, Czechia. So I just full-heartedly embrace the word Czechia, and I wish it a good luck. And I thank all my colleagues and friends and participants here for participating and spreading the word. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.
Thank you so much for such a positive comment. And there is a time for a very last question. Paul, if you would like to ask.
Well, it was more to say thank you to Daniel for that. You're preaching to the converted with me. I use it. I find you as a Czech are still perhaps in a minority. It's my experience. I mean, we've talked with Dr. Pavlinek about the official use, and that's one thing. But when I hear Czechs speaking English, still more often I hear them saying the Czech Republic, or actually Czech Republic without the article, which I think is influencing how it gets called among native English speakers, who increasingly the article is being dropped there. For instance, I watched Euro 2024, the football tournament, watching it on British television, and the commentators routinely referred to it as Czech Republic, not the Czech Republic. And my theory is that's under the influence of Czechs tending to drop the article when using the name of the country. And interestingly, that also carried over into them dropping the article in the Netherlands. So they would talk about Netherlands paying Spain, not the Netherlands. And 10, 20 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. Anyway, that's that thing. But in my experience, natives Czechs, when speaking English, still more often than not, still say the Czech Republic. So that's also changed. Yeah.
Paul, the reason for that is that till this very day, the word Česko, the Czech term for Czechia, is missing from the Czech books. So what generations upon generations of Czechs, when they go through the schooling system, they still somehow believe the myth that the Czech Republic is the proper way to speak in public. And Česko is the term you say, like, you know, if I'm Daniel, you can call me Dan. But that's simply not the case. The term Česko has been generally accepted by the wide population. And if you turn on the Czech public radio, you will hear Česko all the time. Turn the English version of the Czech public radio, the Radio Prague International, you will hear Czechia nearly exclusively. You look at the Czech published expat.cz, and you will see Czechia used in 99% of the time. So the fact that Czechs are using Česká republika and Czech Republic is just because the Ministry of the government still is lacking in their work to let people know that Česko, just like Germany, Německo, are in the books. You will see Česká republika nearly everywhere. There are some books that Česko is not even mentioned as if it never existed. So this is the problem. You are absolutely correct that English Americans and Canadians, English-speaking Canadians and Americans would come to me and say Czechia, and then they encountered Czechs on the vacation, and they told them, "Oh God, no, don't use Czechia." You know, one thing that I suffer when I return to Czechia and I speak with my friends, I hear so much more this feeling of that when I return to Czechia, it's a lot of a herd mentality. It's a small nation, sort of a herd mentality, when I hear a lot of people thinking and speaking the same, like in sort of like a mantra that they've learned. And I suffer. I always feel like I return to the land of the Borg. And when I am in America and Canada, I feel like not that. But this is just as much as I can speak to my feelings, which are not scientifically proven, but I feel that once we truly implement Česko as the correct term in Czechia that is acceptable to even use abroad, it will fundamentally change people's own perception in using Czechia and learning it, pronounce it as Czechia and not Czechia. Because when they say Czechia, sometimes Americans really hear Czechia or Czechia and go to the softer pronunciation of the CH. So those are just the feelings that I can share with you. Well, thank you.
Mr. Pavlínek?
If I may, what has been said is absolutely correct, both by Paul and Dan. There are generations of the Czechs who have not heard Česko in Czech in school and Czechia in English. As I already mentioned, and I said that in English, students are being taught that Czechia is nonsense in 99.9%, that the only correct form is the Czech Republic. We have tried to communicate with the Teachers Association. They would not reply. Basically, it's not being used. You do not see it in any English books. Maybe in some now, but in Czech school books, you would not see that in Czech. So of course, they cannot get used to it. So that's a problem. There's another problem, which is a major one. The Associated Press refuses to include Czechia as the preferred term for English-speaking newspapers. Now, after a lot of effort, what they did was that they basically used the term, the wording that if you use Czechia, you must explain in an article you are writing that you are referring to the Czech Republic. Of course, most journalists are not going to do that. Of foreign affairs is basically one person who is based in Prague. He's Czech, and a few years ago, when the first attempts were to ask the Associated Press to use Czechia, he was asked, and he said, "That's stupid. That's nonsense. It must be the Czech Republic." And maybe the last thing I'd like to mention is that this has been a long struggle. It's been a long struggle about the short name, which began in the 1990s. In 1997, in the city of Brno in Moravia, the civic initiative Česko-Czechia was established by several people who were unhappy that Bohemia in Czech was being used increasingly by the Czech media to refer to the entire country. And of course, being in Moravia and Moravia not being part of Bohemia, these people were quite unhappy. And so since 1997, there have been people who in their free time spend hundreds and hundreds of hours trying to convince key players, key decision makers to consider using the short name and explaining to them how the insistence on the formal name only has been hurting the name of the country abroad. They've been writing articles, letters, and it took many, many years, decades, before they have been, their arguments have been considered. So, Paul, you are absolutely correct. The greatest resistance have come from the Czechs. I was talking about it, and it is because they have not been taught the short name in school. They never heard it on TV, on radio, until relatively recently, both in Czech and even less in English. And basically, I have mentioned that there have been a lot of media articles, published articles with anti-short name arguments that show that these people who were writing those articles are just using their subjective feelings. I don't like it, I'm not used to it, but really have no idea in terms of kind of linguistic usage, and they do not really understand. They do not really understand what is happening, kind of why it is a problem with the formal name. So, I would like to publicly thank to these people in the civic initiative who have been pushing relentlessly this issue for 3 decades. And of course, in most cases, they were completely ignored. But the situation has changed. And as I said at the end of my lecture, I'm very confident that the situation will change because the sports are using it. I'm confident that BBC commentators will learn how to correctly pronounce it. Someone just needs to tell them. By the way, the British, the BBC service does, it's a good example of, an English-speaking country who would, they would have reporters in Czechia. They would talk to the Czech people. They refuse to use Czechia. You won't read it in the BBC reports. You would never read the word Czechia there because they are not using it. And that's why I think it's so important to convince the Associated Press
to allow the usage of Czechia without any restrictions, and basically tell the journalists, use Czechia the same way as you use Slovakia and Croatia, and I don't know what country, because the short names are being used in the media. And of course, the last thing, one problem you have mentioned, which is important, is that the Czechs generally do not know how to use definite and indefinite articles in English. They do not think it's important, so they drop the when they talk about the Czech Republic. And obviously this is incorrect, and using Czechia solves this problem because there is no article being involved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you once again, Professor Pavlínek, for such a detailed and comprehensive explanation, and also that you included all the 15 myths. I'm very happy that you describe it so precisely. What I took for myself, that it's a matter of practice, repetition, training, listening. So I think we have to do our best and spread the Czechia and also Česko, because here in Czechia you can find Czech Republic written in the shop on every pack of potato or carrot. It's really funny somehow. So we have to do our best on every level where we go and where we can spread it. Okay, so thank you very much once again for such an interesting discussion. I'm very happy that everybody was very active and contributed so much. And have a nice day. Thank you very much. And there will be a record from this lecture.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for paying attention and being here. I really appreciate it. And the last sentence, the last word, please start using Czechia. It benefits the country tremendously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.